Well, hello everybody. Just got out of the shower, feeling a little bit moist today. And just got back from an extended nap after the wonderful Liquipedia Q&A we had this morning. We had Infernal, Noni, and Oystein all having a nice little chit-chat about Zerg vs. Protoss. So in case you missed that, definitely recommend tuning into that. That was a lot of really good discussion, and Infernal was there too to provide a little bit of German comic relief. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of Zerg vs. Terran action on Moonglaive. I really like this game. I actually wasn't going to do a Zerg vs. Terran because if you'll notice, every single one of my casts has had a Zerg up to this point, except for one Terran vs. Terran. And that to me seemed horribly imbalanced. So this week I'm going to be focusing a lot more on Terran vs. Protoss, Terran vs. Terran, Protoss vs. Protoss. But because this game was so sweet, we had to spend a little bit of time talking about it. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. So, going ahead and checking out the map that I thought I had loaded up here already, but apparently I was horribly mistaken. So here's Moonglaive. Traditionally, let me just back up a little bit. What I love so much about this game, and this is one of the few games that I've actually seen all the way through before I do the cast. In this game, I love it so much because most of the time Zerg players are going to be going for Mutalisk, and then straight into Lurker Ling. But in this game, we saw Effort do something a little bit different. So normally, when you're going Lurkers, which is the way that Effort opened, you end up seeing the Zerg holding back and not really doing very much until he gets Lurkers. So Terran kind of gets total map control. Terran gets to move freely forward as far as he wants. Well, there's a lot of Fs there. But after that, the Lurkerling is supposed to sort of break through. But in this game, what we ended up seeing is that Light seemed to be in that mindset where he thought he had a lot of map control and was starting to push out a lot, but Effort resisted that quite a great deal in the early game. So let's just go ahead and take a cute look at this map. What I like so much about it, let's just look at this position, because this is where Light ended up spawning in. Already, we see that there's this kind of narrow choke area, and in any of the matchups on this map, controlling this fat high ground area is really, really key. And especially the fact that the only other exit to this center area is right here. Just having that narrow ramp be able to be defended by a lurker or two is really a nice benefit. And also, there's this other path into the main that's really nice for counterattacking, because a huge problem that you'll end up having anytime you go Lurker Ling, especially when you're going for Defiler tech, is that Terrans can completely dominate you if they have enough space to maneuver around in. But what happens on Moonglaive that we see is that if the Zerg can push Terran, maybe Terran has his Medic Marine group here, Zerg can just happily wander here and then cut down here very quickly. So in a sense, the paths from Effort's main to Light's main end up being very, very short because of these two entrances. If there was one entrance, Zerg would have to just slowly work like this, slowly to the right and everything, and it would take a very long time. But because he can push Terran's Medic Marine group to one side or the other, he can run into the other way very, very quickly. And we're going to see quite a great bit of that, and it ends up being really, really effective. And I just especially love the fact that Effort finds a way to maintain a lot of early and mid-game aggression the way that a Zergling Mutalist player would, but instead he does it with Zerglings and a little bit something extra that I'm not going to spoil in case any of you have not seen it. So let's just go ahead and check out this game. So there are two key themes I want to highlight in this match. Well, I guess three. The first one would be that you don't have to play the most standard way possible every single game. Most Zerg vs. Terran players stick with the 3-hatch Mutalisk straight into Lurker Ling, and that's fine, but for a lot of players who are feeling a little bit more cramped, it's a nice demonstration of how Lurkers can be used really, really, really awesomely early on. Two, I want to highlight the fact that when you normally are going Lurker Ling, you have to deal with a lot of difficulties of trying to break in here and do aggression, because Terran normally gets to wander right up about here, and it's really interesting to see the way that Effort deals with that, and the way he, in effect, sidesteps that whole problem. And I'm going to pause right here, because I think this is quite significant. And the third and most important thing, I think, to note is how everything smoothly transitions into the most normal-looking game in the world. Like, if you tuned into this 13, 14 minutes late, it would look like a normal Zerg vs. Terran. And it's a really key thing to highlight because you need to understand how to have your strategy flow into something normal. Because if it can't do that, you're either doing something really, really unorthodox. Like, for instance, if you went mech against Zerg, you're obviously not going to transition into medic marine. But you're either doing something really unorthodox if it doesn't have that transition into normalness, or you're playing totally all in. And you never really want to be all in all your strategies. You want to have good ways to develop that out. And here's the significant thing I think that you should note is that most of the time when Zerg does this hatchet expand and then hatch here, this is normally a 12 hatch, the 11 pools here, and this is a 13 hatch. And normally players go 12 gas when they're going straight for the Mutalisks, occasionally 14 gas, but we see all these larvae being built. So he's getting a slightly later gas than normal. And also we saw that this drone scout came out here for this man. Let's go back to the minimap. All right, there's Light. Light's one of my favorite players, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But this scouting drone came out, and we see now the purpose of that. That back in the main here, Effort was able to sneak in a whole bunch of drones even before his pool was finished, just because he got to check out exactly what Light was doing. Now, Light's a player that a lot of people maybe aren't as familiar with because he tends to be a giant monster in a pro league, or in the pro league, for a team that doesn't win very much, and Light ends up getting knocked out of quite a few individual leagues, but he's been an incredibly strong Terran player for a very long time, and he's just incredibly good at being very, very aggressive in a very traditional sort of way. Actually, let's just pause and have a little history lesson about Light. Light, he doesn't do that much nutty stuff. There was a period of time where he was trying to do a lot of two-port Wraith and a lot of weird Valkyrie stuff, but for the most part, he plays very, very standardly. In fact, in Terran vs. Protoss, which is a matchup of his that I like watching the most, he opts for the very standard lots of factories before getting the plus one upgrades. And most Terrans, especially after Flash, love getting fast +1 upgrades. Or they like doing something Iris style, where they play very, very aggressively in the opening. But what I love so much about Light is that he relies a lot on those mid-game timing pushes, and he's, for some reason, really comfortable with incredibly insane games, where he's like losing his main and he's just happily attacking forward, and that appears to be his comfort zone, which makes sense, because MBC game tends to churn out a lot of out-of-control aggressive players, and that's probably what he's used to in his practice all the time. But we get to see in this game how Light goes straight for a lot of aggression with a very, very normal looking style of play. And that's one thing I really, really like. The fact that it's not something insane. He's not going for any sort of weird Valkyrie, Wraith, dropship harass. He's just going straight for the standard Medic Marine army, but in a composition such that he gets to be very aggressive. Now look at this. These are the first 2 Zerglings that I've seen Zerg make. Zerg's been making nothing but drones this entire time, it looks like. Other than, these Zerglings right here that we just got done seeing. These are the first Zerglings, that have attacked this SCV. The other Zerglings, and this is really key, go straight for the Terran main. Anytime you're doing this sort of Lurker Ling style, and there's a huge risk of you dying to early pressure because you're trying to make so many drones here, you really do need to send one of your first 2 Zerglings straight across, and then you can have some of your other Zerglings doing some stuff around here. And it's clear that Effort was trying to really poke in there and see if the early expansion was happening, which is exactly what Effort's probably predicting here. But look at how many drones we have going on here. This is just really, really fascinating to watch the way the Effort plays this off. So I really now, in this position as Zerg, am thinking, okay, how am I going to put a huge amount of pressure on Terran in the mid-game? Because that really seems like my only opening. When I end up doing this sort of Lurker Ling style, I get a lot of drones early on. That's where I build up my economy. And then starting in the mid-game, I get to push forward and take some expansions and then focus a little bit later on economy. We're going to see a little bit of a switcheroo with Effort here. Because an important thing whenever you're playing Zerg is to think, when do I get to power in my build and when do I get to be aggressive? This is some of the stuff that I'll be discussing in that 2-hatch versus 3-hatch podcast that I hope I'll eventually get around to, but fortunately the IGF submission date is November 15th. That's the Independent Games Festival, and I want to get in so bad, so I'm going to be kind of crunching that one out. And this is the usual sort of stuff we're going to see Zerg do, kind of poking with Zerglings, but anyways. Whenever you're doing this sort of style, you end up thinking, man, I need to get a lot of drones and focus on economy and then do attacking. But what's interesting about the way Effort plays is that he does a lot of aggression early on, And then he starts focusing on economy. So we're going to see a lot of pressure coming out of Zerg. We're going to see a lot of Zerglings coming out. And then we're going to see lurkers, but pretty much only lurkers for a while. We're not going to see those get boosted with Zergling numbers for quite some time. This is quite late for a lurker den. Normally, in my eyes, I think I really need to get those lurkers out immediately so I can hope to do any damage to Terran at any point in this game. But really, when you're getting a den this late, it further accentuates that need to harass so much. It further accentuates that idea that when you're doing lurker ling like this, you don't really get to put that much pressure on Terran, so you have to have some sort of real big strength later. So when I see Effort doing this, I think, wow, he has to have something really strong going on later. And of course, when I was watching this game, he defied my expectation and put a lot of pressure on Light with all these Zerglings. Now, I do like the fact that he got the Spire really late and then he got the Spire and then the Hydralis Den really late, because it forces Terran to get all these Medic Marine and these 4 barracks here, and then waste all this additional money on whatever they're called, turrets, yeah. And what's a little bit unfortunate about this is that if your Terran opponent is bad enough, he won't respond properly, and he won't get all these barracks, and he won't get all these turrets. I'll come back to this in a minute. So you can't necessarily base the entire hope of this build on the fact that he will do exactly this. You're going to expect him to do something along these lines. And Light kind of went way down the anti-Mutalisk path with all these barracks, but make sure that anytime you're doing one of these feints, as I call it, where you're trying to semi-trick your opponent into think you're going Mutalisks, you need to make sure that you have some plan that appropriately deals for when your opponent correctly reads your lurker play. So see, look at this burrow. This is what was really cute, and I was just like, whoa, this is really nice. And look, now we immediately see the advantage of having all these openings. We had Terran come out here, and yeah, there was some burrow here, but we're abusing this path. And when Terran got here, we have Zerglings coming up here. We have more Zerglings coming down there. Always a little bit of a danger. And of course, even if Light was expecting lurkers and started to move forward, this is the sort of thing you'd rely on. Yeah, Terran, you can go ahead and try to be aggressive and wall me off, but I have so many entrances to your base, I'm going to keep you pulled back for as long as possible. And note that this is a death trap for Zerglings to be back in this far corner. Even without burrow, especially without burrow, it's kind of dangerous to end up going back there because it seems like you're going to lose all your Zerglings. But this is still a really good place for Zerglings to be because it pulls all the Medic Marine to the far back of the base, so you can start doing more aggressive stuff at the front. Effort, that said, does have burrow, so he gets to do whatever he wants. And this is actually a really nice touch, that he's going around here doing all this aggression, and he kills off just 1 or 2 turrets. Nothing too over the top, but just the fact that he's killing 1 or 2 of those turrets would signify to me as a Terran player, thinking, oh, well, he's clearly going for Mutalisks. He wants to kill these turrets. Look at this overreaction by Light. Well, I probably shouldn't say overreaction. Look at this seemingly appropriate reaction, which turns out to be completely worthless because Mutalisks aren't coming at all. I also really like how Light doesn't panic that much. I mean, I think Light could have done a little bit of a better job holding this off, but he plays really calmly in the face of suddenly seeing this lurker transition. A lot of Terrans would start getting a little bit suspicious at this stage that Mutalisks perhaps are not coming. It doesn't look like Light is doing that here, but that's still something to think about. And see, this expansion might seem a little bit later than normal, but so much money was being devoted to these Zerglings, and we're going to see how Effort deals with that a little bit later on. But again, that's totally a fine component. This, I think, is so smart. Oh my god, so many C players, and even like B, and maybe even some A- players would go, oh, free SCVs, and they burrow right here. But of course, you have the SCVs clearly going to be running away back to the main down here. And then, if your lurkers are burrowed here, this is a really easy arc for Terran to attack this. This is a really difficult arc for Terran to deal with. Watch how much Terran loses right here. So it's so hard to attack these guys wedged back here. It's a pretty significant loss for Terran. Now watch how Terran does not panic here. He's going to be playing really calmly. He has just enough Medic Marine to hold this off. And then especially from here on out, Light is going to be playing very, very well. There's going to be a few situations even where if Light attacks with his Medic Marine army, it'll just get absolutely demolished. And he does not make that mistake. He calmly pulls back, even though lurkers are right at his front door, and continues as planned. Okay, so here's some of the transitioning I was talking about. These Marines comfortably moving right on out into the middle of the map, especially when you kill off 5 lurkers, which is a pretty significant number at this stage in the game. You're not terrified of a big lurker-ling counterattack. 5 or 6 is a pretty key number. Actually, keep that in your head as you're playing Terran. If you kill off 5 or 6 lurkers, you can feel comfortable moving out like this. But again, this transition, he's going straight into the normal store to play, but look at his Medic Marine. They're not hanging out in his base, which is what you'd normally see if you're playing against a Mutiling player. Instead, he's being really aggressive. This is maybe a little bit over the top, but again, Light's a very, very aggressive player. He likes doing those sorts of maneuvers. And if you want to do that sort of stuff, definitely practice it. Don't just in a game think, well, maybe I can kill those 2 lurkers. That's the sort of thing that you want to, have a friend burrow 2 lurkers on the top of a ramp and say, hey, I'm going to try to break this like 5 times and see if I can do it. Here's just a little subtle thing that's great. Against Mutilist player, never have SCVs hanging out. Those are just free SCVs. But against a Lurker-Ling player, oh yeah, hang out all over the place. Especially when there's these multiple attack paths. Look at this SCV. He gets to just try to smack the Lurker a little bit before retreating. And now we have the Light clearly preparing adequately for it. I mean, we see this giant army moving out here across the map. He's definitely feeling comfortable back here in his main. And again, this is really smart. It's sort of pinching off this area here. Zerg isn't trying desperately to do any sort of violent damage to Terran. Just trying to play back. And right now, this is where we see what I was mentioning earlier on. The fact that most Zergs end up being very aggressive with Lurker-Ling in the mid-game, and then focusing a little bit later on the economy. But you see them building up a ton of Zerglings to go on with these Lurkers. But Effort, on the other hand, we see him only making Lurkers for quite a long time during this game, which immediately signifies that he's going straight for a big economy-based build, and but we still see him being able to do some cute action with these lurkers. We don't see him completely throwing his game away, and that's something that really is really fun to watch, because I have not seen Zerg players just do this naked lurker style in quite some time. There's some great games of Calm doing this naked lurkers in the mid game, and it works beautifully, and I'll have to do some of those guys sometime, because those are some of my favorite games in the past 6 months or so. Or actually maybe even 9 or 10 months. Those are just some awesome, awesome games. But really, we're going to see Effort doing some cute stuff with here, and Light being really, really smart with his Medic Marine. Just moving around a lot. See, look at these positions. You want to hold position there a good percentage of the time. And look, just by spreading out his lurkers, he's able to do a little bit of extra damage here. Look, that's just 3 Marines. Might not seem significant, but it's going to be a pretty devastating blow to a Terran to lose that much. And so this sort of stuff, generally, I would say you shouldn't do, but surprisingly, Light just happened to not have that much Medic Marine. Be really careful when you're moving your lurkers forward like this. Even note how Effort didn't burrow that close to the Marines. Actually, let's just take another look at that. So here's where the losses happen. So then we rewind here. See, this is pretty far from the Medic Marine, and don't be too eager to just stim and kill stuff off, because as we saw, one lurker shot pretty much just negates all that. It's totally okay just to back up a little bit if you're not sure. That's one of those things, again, that would be great to practice, that you should have a friend say, hey, start burrowing lurkers against me, let me see if I can take them out. Look how many drones are there. There were so many drones there, and only now are we starting to see some Zerglings come back into play. But look at that alternation that we saw Zerg do. Zerg went a lot of Zerglings and then only lurkers for the longest time, and built up a great economy, and is now surging forward. Already has the Defiler up. The Defiler is part of that powering that we were talking about, part of that economy. We have another hatchery that's been thrown up. We have this +1 carapace that's got researched. And now here's where we start to see really interesting troop movements in the middle. The key thing to note by Light is how aggressively he's moving towards the middle of the map. You want to have a lot of ground to maneuver with when you're playing against a Lurker-Ling player. So super kick-ass job by Light, taking advantage of his 4 barracks to move out so much. And this is what I love so much. He starts adding on huge amounts of barracks. That's 6 barracks total, and he's doing the normal thing, getting the 2 starports, but we're going to see him get way more barracks. Now watch this. Watch this positioning of effort. This is beautiful positioning. Again, taking advantage of the fact that he can walk forces up here, even splitting up Light's units up here with his main. Because if you just burrow 4 or 5 lurkers here, and then run the rest of your army in here, that can be really potentially dangerous for Terran. But so Light, look at this. Light has all these lurkers right outside his base. His natural expansion probably feels real vulnerable here, and all these units, you see him start to spread out, but look at this. Calmly pulls away, lets the tanks deal some damage, and doesn't overreact. There are very few circumstances where you desperately need to kill off all the lurkers, or else you'll lose the game right there. And this is one of those periods where it might seem like one of those situations where you desperately need to kill off all the lurkers because he's at your front. But look at Light happily having his army here, even with some lurkers still in between his natural and the center of the map. Very nice patience. And that's actually a really cute point to note. Light is an incredibly aggressive player, always up in the face of his opponent, but still is very, very patient in circumstances where a lot of players would see that move as being very, very passive. I see that as correctly being very patient, and that's some great tank positioning. That tank is just not going to get touched anytime soon. It's a little unfortunate that this science vessel moved out of range there and didn't end up taking it out, but, you know, no big deal. Just really good placement that I wanted to highlight. And that's actually, I really like this a lot, that Light just started to move out. He's like in the middle of the map, and Effort threw out a swarm like half a minute in advance. That swarm's been up for a long time. Just did not want to lose his main. So now here is what we would call very standard Zerg vs. Terran. We have a whole lot of lurkers and Zerglings. We have the usual sort of medic marine composition. We have some science vessels getting pumped out here. Terran's going to start expanding up here. The look of this is exactly what you would expect. But crazy stuff happened early on. And what's great to note, the most important thing to note, is this awesome transitioning job by Effort right back into normal play. And the way Light dealt with this unbelievable, weird aggression with Zerglings and Burrow early on transitions straight into the normal stuff. Really great. And of course, right now, this is why Zerg players take mains. This is actually a little bit of a tangent, but a lot of Zerg players have asked me, you know, well, so I'm here, why not take this position? I can hold this so much easier. Why not do that, especially considering I'm going for a big Lurker Ling army? And the obvious answer is that if you take this, how do you get your 4th gas? So we see the Zerg taking this because he can just waltz right down there and take that. That's actually a big consideration on Tornado, where you have a 3rd gas right outside your choke, but still a lot of players favor taking another main, just because getting a 4th gas easily is so significant. And here's Light cleaning up some of these key positions. This is always a big danger to watch for when you're against a Zerg player who doesn't quite have Defilers yet, and especially emphasize Lurkers in the mid-game. They're going to have control over these weird key positions, such as this spot right here. And it's good to sort of clean those out, the same way you would see a Protoss player cleaning out mines against a Terran player. It's good to just sort of move around and make sure you take care of that. Now, as we're seeing this big attack up here, we note that we already have mines coming out for Light, and right as his Dark Swarm ends up coming here. Let's go ahead and take a look briefly. Let's backtrack a little bit. We're at about 14 minutes in the game right now. If we rewind back to this stage, we see here Light has a whole bunch of barracks, and he has a factory, and he was adding on 2 starport right as he was pushing out against this Lurker Ling army. And that's something a lot of Terran players are a little fearful of doing. A lot of times they'll opt more frequently to just get 2 factories and just have a much more muscular army. But we see Light brilliantly straight transitioning to an endgame army really, 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 really quickly. It was actually really cool to see how quickly he went straight for the mines and the 2 starports. And this is why mines are especially important on this map. If you don't get mines, it's going to be a lot harder to hold this area here and counterattacks in this area up here, because your army can't exactly be everywhere at once. And if you're Terran, you right now want to be in Zerg's face. You right now want to make sure Zerg doesn't feel comfortable leaving the front of either the natural down here or his original natural up here. So what you want to do is do a lot of movement around, especially in this stage where it's Lurkerling Defiler, moving around like this. Oh yeah, that Defiler is doomed. See ya. And now actually this feels even scarier for the... I'll ignore this drop for now. This feels even scarier for these Lurkers out here in the middle of the map. They're totally isolated and they can get clamped from either side. This is a good attempt by Light to do a little dropship action down here. And I also like the fact, oops, let's not pause on Everett's face. That's, even though he's very pretty, it's not particularly educational. If the attack's moving up here, having that dropship swing down here is really great. Most Terrans are going to try to move here and move down. I like the fact that Light moved around and then up to the southern side. Most Terran players aren't going to do that. Oh god, Light, he's so awesome. And I have glasses that look almost exactly like his. See, look, I'll prove it to you. Look, check it out. Oh, yeah, look at me. I'm Light, guys. Best Terran in the world. This is kind of interesting by Light. He's expanding up here. He's expanding really, really aggressively. I'm going to comment on that later. I'll sort of table that for now. And here's another dropship move that I liked quite a bit. Well, not in range of the Sunken Colony. Probably going to be going around there, but notice how the army defended the dropship. If there were Scourge there, the dropship could have just turned right around and pulled back to the army. Make sure your army is doing something to support this dropship, whether it be distracting it with a huge push up here or just right there with it. Sort of alternating with that can be a really big benefit. So here is part of the reason why we want to do so much moving around and cutting off the Defilers, because if we can prevent Defilers from boosting this group of Lurkers right here, we don't have to worry about these sorts of attacks. I actually would have preferred if Light had taken some tanks and crunched down on this after he'd surrounded it. I don't think it was a dire need for him to move all the way up here. Maybe if he moved up here, it dropped there, and then pulled back and clamped that off. I would have liked that a little bit better. But right now this is an obnoxious situation for Light to be in. But of course Light is very comfortable in these insane dynamics, where he's losing his main and dropping here and trying to kill off this expansion because he knows if he can trade this, he's not in beautiful shape, but he's at an advantage. And look at this, 9 barracks, insane aggression, going to be putting so much pressure on your opponent. An alternative to this is adding on another factory, especially when you've secured these expansions. I like getting that many barracks as well, though. But having the extra vultures and tank support is really important once you start dealing with those late-game ultras. It's actually really interesting to think about how in Zerg vs. Terran, you get tanks early, and then you stop getting tanks to focus for this mobile army, and then you get tanks again later on when you're against that big Ultralisk army. And see, look at this. This defense is really cool, and it relies heavily on mines. And, wow, that's not so good, but... notice how Light has to be pulled back just a little bit, and it has a lot to do with the fact that those units were still there. I think that maybe if these units had been killed off when they were cut off from Defilers earlier on, that this big obnoxious stuff wouldn't have happened early. But Light is having to stay on his half of the map. He's not really crossing this for a while. But it is cool, the fact that he's able to take these 2 expansions pretty safely. I mean, he's not mining right here, but it's not like he expanded and then immediately died. Always a good technique to think about. Ways to take expansions maybe a little earlier than you're comfortable with, because you'd be surprised with how much you can get away with. Still sticking with a really big Lurker Zergling army. We haven't seen any Ultralists come out yet. That's totally okay. I mean, Zerg's putting huge amounts of pressure on Terran as it is. I mean, there's no desperate need to do it. He has his 4 gases well secured. All he needs to do is keep wandering over here, distracting Terran and preventing Terran from putting any pressure here. So right now we're seeing the most normal Zerg vs. Terran in the world. Zerg on his 4 gas, Terran expanding a bunch and trying to put pressure on, but maybe faltering because swarms are so awesome. But I love this, just all these mines here. But you should really note how insane the early game was compared to this. And actually, let's just back up a little bit. I really loved... So this tank's obviously in a really good position, but look at this great composition. Just 4 Marines and a Fire Bat are just going to annihilate those Zerglings that wanted to come around to take out the tank. Unfortunately, a mine ended up killing the tank anyways, but that's a really cute little extra thing you can do. Just having a tank with just a fire bat and a few Marines can be very, very helpful. And look, see, these lurkers aren't doing any huge monetary damage, really. I mean, they're stopping these SCVs from mining, but it's not like, there was a drop here that killed off everything. What's more significant to note is the fact that all these units of light are having to pull back. See, look at them all retracting back to this expansion. That's the main purpose of those lurkerlings. And see, this is the danger. The first drop this entire game that has really failed horrifically was because light had his whole army not putting pressure here or not directly defending the dropship. The dropships were essentially sort of thrown in as, hey, maybe I can kill off Zerg here, maybe I can do some damage here. And it's important to note how maybe that is. So you need to have as much support behind that as you can. But watch right here. So we have Light doing his stuff here, and we're going to see on the minimap, here are the dropships right here. Zerg has no distractions here. There's no army to defend it there. So when Effort starts moving across here, which is the most normal place for him to be moving in the world. I mean, Light is going to be Effort's going to be putting tons of pressure on Light on these expansions, so Light needs to expect all sorts of movement in here. But these dropships are undefended. Now, that is a little coincidental, the fact that Effort ended up moving out at exactly that timing, but it is significant to note how bad it can be when that sort of coincidence happens, and to think about techniques to avoid dealing with pure coincidence. So if you just had some more units up here, those lurkers and zerglings would have been back here, and those dropships would have had a clear drop path. That's something especially nice when you're expanding up here along this way as Terran. You're clearly going to be defending here, so clearly you're going to have a little bit of a benefit pushing into the main, because you're going to have units there anyways. And see, lots of movement around. Totally awesome by Light. Little cute groups. This is what Light's really good at. Just having these little cute groups moving around here just to make sure nothing too excessive's going on with Zerg's expanding. More of this stuff going on. You don't want to have this happen. And I really wouldn't say at this point, well, why doesn't Light have X here? The biggest mistake you can perhaps make in StarCraft is to think, man, it would be really nice if I had blank right now, so I should get that in the future. So for instance, a Terran player would be like, man, I'm getting harassed by vultures. It would be really nice to have cannons here right now. So in the next game, they incorrectly build cannons right there. What you should instead do is back way up in the game and say, okay, why is this drop even happening? And the answer might be, wow, I really need to start positioning my Dragoons better and build pylons around the edge of my map, so that way I can deny these drops a lot better. And that way, we avoid spending any money on something that would seem nice at the time, and instead combat what the actual core of the problem is. So, for instance, here, we see these lurkers here, and a player might be like, oh, why doesn't he have bunkers here? Where are the tanks? Where's the defense here? He's been getting hit here. He really should defend. There's some bits of truth to that. However, the main thing to focus on is the fact that Light really needed to maintain control of this piece of ground here and this piece of ground here, and then nothing would have ever gotten up here in the first place. The fact that these lurkers are here now is an effect of Light's little bits of control mistake here earlier on. Excuse me. So this is nice by Light, just these little nice counterattacks. I would have preferred, though, since that's very clearly going to die, it needs to do a pretty decent amount of damage, maybe kill some drones. But once it checks here, I don't see a problem with checking back down here again. Really controlling this, especially this is a pretty key 5th gas, because if we look, Terran has to move all the way over here to kill it. He has to even go back down onto low ground. Even if Terran does move in here and kill it, this is just an unbelievably easy place for Zerg to surround, especially just by sending units up here from his bottom bases and sending units down here from his top bases. And also Zerg can counterattack here and counterattack up here. This is obviously the safest place for Zerg to expand, and definitely a very dangerous place for Terran to let Zerg expand to. So I'd prefer these Medic Marine wandering down there a touch. This is kind of fun, seeing this little Medic Marine wall off. Yeah! Go Marines! Come on, you got this, guys. So many barracks still producing. Light also is really good at constantly making SCVs. I used to love watching his first-person views and just count the number of SCVs he missed, and it was oftentimes 0. He's just so cool. And see, now we're starting to see the move back to tanks here. And that is to combat just the pure life of Ultralisks. Again, this is part of the reason why you shouldn't go mass Ultralisk against someone going mech, because they maximize the amount of damage received from tanks. And considering mech does generally use a lot of tanks, don't go Ultralisk. That's exactly why we're seeing Ultralisk right here. What I dislike about this situation is, in a general note, look at the fact that these tanks right here are responsive, in a sense. It's sort of like saying, well, it seems like Ultralisks are coming out. I guess I have to start getting more tanks now. You want to be a little bit ahead of that. You want to say, okay, he has his 4 gas. He's going to be getting Ultralisks in the future. Let me start building up tanks right now. And part of the reason that Light has not been able to do that is he's been losing quite a bit of stuff just defending these 2 expansions and losing drops here and there. And if we avoid that, then we get to have tanks come out a lot earlier. And we can still maintain aggression with big medic marine armies, but as we're losing them, we can replace that food by getting more and more and more and more tanks. And at this point, this game's virtually impossible for Terran to win. If I'm Zerg in this position, which, you know, a lot of Zergs do get in this position where they feel like they're at a huge advantage and they end up losing, the way that Terran can come back is with some weird dropship harass that ends up taking out a bunch of key expansions. So right now, as Zerg, as much as I'm loving doing this, I've just put 1 extra set of Scourge up there and 1 extra set of Scourge maybe down there. That's the sort of precaution that just helps you not lose 2 or 3 games you may have. And at this point, Effort has such an unbelievable economic advantage that he can just go Ultralisk Zergling and continue battering Terran back. It's not necessarily as cost efficient as getting Defilers and carefully pushing forward, but cost efficient is not necessarily always correct in StarCraft. That's one of the most important things to note about StarCraft, is that you, in some cases, are not going for cost efficiency. In this case, Zerg has a tremendous economic advantage. If he just keeps sending in this very mobile this very mobile Ultralisk Zergling army, he can keep pulling Light's forces around and eventually start pulling it down. The instant you add Defilers into that mix, it becomes significantly less mobile. And also, by adding on more Defilers, you have slightly less Ultralisks. But watch the way that Effort plays this out. Watch the way that Effort is just so aggressive all the time with these huge Zergling Ultralisk numbers that there's very little that Light can actually do. So, I mean, cleaning up this is really good because it kind of keeps Terran's forces back. And yeah, he's going to lose a whole bunch of stuff, but watch, he just keeps pushing forward. Still a really sick macro by Light. Just love watching him add on all those barracks. See, and more pushing forward. Not the most cost-effective, because we are losing a lot of Ultralisks to irradiate, but you don't need to be cost-effective, you need to win. Zerg is slowly getting a bigger and bigger advantage against Terran. And there's very little Terran can do about it if he's having stuff shoved in his face all the time. If you end up getting Defilers, you know, it's a little bit more fragile. You can lose some Defilers to irradiate, and then you have to kind of sit while you wait for more Defilers to come forward. But with this, look at it. This is just not that much. It's 2 Ultralisks and some Zerglings and some Scourge. Maybe pick off some of these Science Vessel numbers. And look, more little counterattacks going on, abusing the architecture of the map. And this is going to be so hard to deal with. And look, hey, we have an Ultralisk going over here. I have not seen a Defiler for quite some time now. Correctly so. I like the fact that Effort's just continuing to batter forward. And look at this. All these expansions for Effort. Effort's retaking this expansion. And there's really not much that Light can do. So just to sort of recap what I was saying earlier on, I love the fact that Effort ended up opening with a really, not just Lurker Ling, which is somewhat unorthodox, but with an unorthodox version of Lurker Ling, opening up with those burrows and then staying with pure Lurker and powering in the mid-game for much longer than I would have expected. And even though he opens up with that nutty style, he transitions straight into this normal play. Look how normal this is for Zerg. I mean, it's a little abnormal for Terran to be clinging on desperately for dear life at this point. Most Terrans just leave. There we go. But it's really cool to see how that smoothly fed right into the most normal gameplay in the world. And even from Light's point of view, he opened up with this very, very stereotypically anti-Mutalisk style, with lots of turrets and 4 barracks going Medic Marine. But he ended up moving right back into the anti-lurker play just by moving aggressively forward, and he went really quickly for a late-game army. We really didn't see any mid-game for Light. Light just got maybe 2-3 tanks and just straight off went for the extra starport and straight off went for the extra mines. That was really, really cool to watch. So let's take a brief look back at the game, because obviously we want to talk a little bit about what Light could have done. So at this point, I'm going to briefly ignore what happened early on and pretend we're just watching a normal game. We see right here a lot of the counterattack movements by Effort, and especially here, when Light started to move forward here, I would have liked a little bit more securing of this area as he's starting to expand. So we see more movement here. Yeah, right as Light's starting to expand up to here and here. And some of these dropships didn't quite do as much as they should have, but, you know, very normal at this point. But so right here, this Defiler gets picked off. We see it right there, and then focus on these units in the middle of the map. Actually, let me go ahead and zoom in on the mini-map just a touch, because that's oh so fun. So look, watch these units in the middle of the map. This is pretty much just lurkers. It's just these lurkers. These Zerglings are going to get picked off. Or maybe I'm zoomed to the wrong portion of the game. There was one portion here, yeah, where this move around happened, and nothing really went on with these lurkers. And I just think it's really important to sort of clear those areas out. So right now we're seeing this troop movement here by Light, and this feels a little under-defended. I mean, even note that there's what we're seeing right here is this portion of the map has Fog of War on it. We really are going to need a lot of mines and a lot of troops positioned right there. That's the sort of key point. That's why you're going to want to be rallying a lot of troops up here and planting some mines here and maybe leaving one tank there. Oh my god, I'm an idiot. Sorry, let me... None of you saw that because I was still zoomed in, yeah. What we're seeing is that portion of the minimap right there has Fog of War on it. So we're going to need a lot of defense right here. A lot of defense right there. So we're going to have a lot of key units positioned here, rallied here, and then we're going to plant a bunch of mines here to avoid these sorts of counterattacks. We want to deny attack paths here and leave the rest of our muscle in the middle, flexible enough to move around. So let's zoom right back ahead in to our friendly neighborhood minimap. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute the chat. And now's the time we're going to start opening up conversation for some questions. So we see some more troop movement down here by Light. We get to see the mini-map, but see, notice right here, there's this hole right here in the defense, and we have some lurkers here that easily puncture right in. The army that we're seeing move in here, these little dots, is just 3 lurkers and a bunch of Zerglings, but watch what the effect is. Look at all these units pulling all the way back. There's lurkers here now. There's lurkers here there. Just by having that brief undefended area costs Light huge amounts. And here we see the dropships moving up north that do get picked off. So that's something I really would have liked to see a whole lot more. Is Light just being a little bit better with those troop movements and holding off some of those key areas. So let me just reclose the screen back down, and let's pause and take some questions from all my nice, kind viewers who are nice enough to tune in on a daily basis. So, okay, Ava Angelina, I actually dig this question because it relates back to the ever so wonderful Team Liquid Star League that's just been announced. What can Terran players do over the next 2 weeks, in addition to mass gaming, to prepare for the TSL ladder? And of course, I'm going to answer this question in the context of this Zerg vs. Terran. A lot of little stuff that you want to do, like for instance, how Light tried to aggressively move up the ramp to try to take out the expansion. Let's actually just briefly move back to the screen so we can look. Light was trying to move up here with Medic Marine. There was a part in the game where Light tried to kill off a whole bunch of lurkers there with some control, and it didn't quite go as planned. The advice I would have to any player is everyone's going to have their big overarching build, but try to identify some key parts that you're kind of unsure of that are little things. Not like, wow, should I be going vessels here or should I be going tanks? Do something really little, like how do I micro against that? And find a friend and practice it like 20 times, like literally 20. I mean, for instance, before a tournament, after I've gotten all my major thoughts out of the way about how I'm going to play the map, how to do all the long-term stuff, I go to one of my friends and I say, hey, I need you to bunker rush me like 200 times. And what we do is we save it right before the bunker rush gets to my base, and we'll practice it 5 or 6 times a minute, just me holding it off. And I'll go, I didn't really like that. Okay, I'm feeling a little more comfortable. Okay, now let's actually play a real game. And now I want you to either bunker rush me this way or bunker rush me this way. And then he tries to surprise me and sort of building up from there. So definitely start that way, since you have 2 weeks before the latter period begins, just to work on those little things that you maybe might not want to do in the middle of a TSL match. Think, man, do I really want to start going for big spreads against lurkers right now? No, you should have practiced that beforehand. So do that. That's what I think. Shotcoder asks, do you think Light could have done better with earlier dropships harass since he was being so aggressive? I definitely think so. I think the fact that Light was so aggressive moving forward on the map, the fact that Light was able to control these areas for a good bit of time, just moving right around here, opens up this whole side to drops, and this whole side to drops right there. Obviously, we have to worry a little bit about counterattacking, which is why I was so impressed that Light got mines that quickly to deal with that. But I do think that Light could have done a little bit better of a job. This dropship down here I don't mind so much. I mean, it did end up dying, but I do like the fact that it hooked down like this while Light was moving up here. But that second dropship I felt like was just a little bit sloppier. And I would have liked to see a little bit better control and better precision with dropships in that case. And of course, it's always good to be able to get your dropships in, because these can always do serious damage. And the only way that you can really do that when you're against a player who's as good as Effort is defensive matrixing the dropships and then pressuring somewhere else really, really hard. Pretty Little Pony asks a great question and has a hilarious name. Pretty Little Pony asks, what could Light have done when Effort got his 5th gas? The answer is, don't let him get the 5th gas. The way you want it to look for Terran is that Zerg is struggling to get his 4th, and by the time Zerg does get his 4th, he's struggling to stay alive because he's being pressured so much. You should watch Flash vs. Hogel, a game that unfortunately was lost by Livestream.com. I'm still in email talks to try to recover my talk of that game. But that's a beautiful example of Zerg barely able to get his 4th gas, but Terran's so aggressive he still gets pounded apart. And the same goes with the 5th gas. You obviously don't want to let Zerg get the 5th gas because that really is just so much gas, but you need to have been so aggressive leading up to taking that Zerg doesn't even really feel comfortable once he does get it up. Honestly, once Effort did get the 5th gas, there was almost nothing Light could have done to repair it. So, Protoss Rule asks a question I like, says, why did Zerg stay with lurkers so long and not go to Ultralisks as soon as he got his 4th gas? You don't want to be getting Ultralisks too soon. Ultralisks are a really easy unit. They're like awesomely easy because if your macro's bad, who cares? You can make Ultralisks. You can have like 15 idle larvae and just box them and hit you and bam, down to 0 minerals and gas. The problem, though, is that if you're not in a good position with the center of the map, it's a little bit harder to move those Ultralisks around and to actually do the damage that you want to do. So, for instance, let's imagine if Zerg has just been cramped right up here and has just been cramped right up here, and we're now starting to go Ultralisks. We're spending almost all our gas on that, a lot of minerals. So, if we want to start moving out, well, first of all, we're going to have to deal with a lot of irradiates coming out here because our lurker numbers are going to be dwindling. So we're going to deal with a lot of irradiates here and here. So we need to start throwing some swarms down to defend here. And then the Ultralisks are going to have to be playing defensively here. The Ultralists are going to have to be replacing what those lurkers were doing if you're against a good Terran. That's one of the biggest key things to note. If you're against a weaker Terran, going Ultralist will just almost always win immediately. But against a good Terran, you are going to have to defend a lot with Ultralisks here if you're not careful, especially with lurkers. And as every Zerg player knows, if there's vessels here and there's Ultralisks here, you're just going to get free irradiates on the Ultralisks. So then when your Ultralisks do come out, they're really low on life, or they're very squishy, as I like to say. So it's important to have lurker laying out enough to do a lot of counterattack stuff. And that's not even necessary for the let me rephrase that. This map isn't what allows you to be counterattacky as Zerg. You can do that on other maps, even like Python. But it's really important to note that if you're going Lurker Ling, you can't just play totally defensively, so sending some Lurker Ling and Defilers up like this is really good. Sending Lurker Lings and Defilers up like this is really good. And once you have Terran kind of pulled all the way back here, and maybe you've even let some gas build up over time, then all of a sudden you can make a whole bunch of Ultralists. They're going to be really high on upgrades, and it's going to be really, really difficult for Terran to do anything. So actually, as an exercise, as one of the things you can do in the next 2 weeks. God, I really like that question. One of the things you can do in the next 2 weeks is just practice not getting Ultralists, just relying on Lurkers, Zerglings, Defilers, some counterattacking, and most importantly, a lot of really good defense. And then try to see if when you get your Ultralists, you can just shove Terran over immediately. That's always a really, really fun thing to do. Oh, here's a great question by Nightcat. Nightcat asks, how many barracks would you say is ideal for Terran to get when only on 2 bases? Depends on what you want to do. Iris and Light, players who like being very, very aggressive, will generally get up to about 7 barracks because they don't intend on expanding anytime soon. The most typical composition is 2 starports, 6 barracks, and then expanding a little bit later. But we see Light and some other players getting 7, even 8 barracks with their 2 starports and getting the Vultures for mines and being super, super aggressive. So those are some good numbers to think about. If you want to be expanding really, really early, you can get away with maybe 5 barracks, but the problem is you have to really, really know what you're doing when you're taking those expansions. And if you're comfortable just losing a lot as you practice, that's totally okay. Like, it's really fun to figure out ways to secure expansions. I like figuring out defensive techniques far more than I like figuring out aggressive techniques. So I'm going to take all 3 of these questions. First one from Clown Baby. How could Light have done a better job of punishing effort for not getting Mutalisks? Ooh, that's actually such a good question. I'm actually going to stop and think for a little bit. How could Light have done a better job of punishing effort for not getting Mutalisks? I think it's important less to say how he punishes Zerg for not getting Mutalisks, and instead to think how Zerg deals with not having Mutalisks. Because the whole point of Mutalisks is to do enough harassment and damage to Terran that it delays Terran's mid-game push a lot. If you're going Lurkers, all of a sudden, Terran feels a lot more comfortable. Terran doesn't have to deal with that much harassment. So that's why Effort cleverly put in all that early pressure with Zerglings with Burrow, because he knows that Terran gets sort of a free ride if you're going for Lurkers. So the way that Light ends up punishing Effort after he sees that no Mutals are coming is that he moves out into the middle of the map much sooner. So we saw that Light is able to move up here before he ever even got science vessels, because you don't really need to hold back so much. Normally what happens is when you're getting harassed, you're forced back here, and then Zerg gets Lurkers and can position them right here, and Terran's only really comfortable moving out once he has all the science vessels to see the Lurkers. But if you know where the Lurkers are, because you've gotten to move out here so early, you can pretty much rally here and start your push beginning here into Zerg's base, as opposed to starting it way back here, going up high ground, and then pushing into Zerg's base. So that is a really important thing to note. So the next question we're going to get from Kawazan, which is, did Light expand to both his 3rd and 4th because of an opening he created in Effort's play, or was it just a calculated risk? I think this has a lot to do with the structure of the map. I think most Terran players are aware that once they get a huge number of barracks and starports here, that they can defend their expansion here just by putting a lot of pressure and just being out in this area of the map is a good way for defending that. But what's interesting to note is that if we advance to here, not only do we defend this expansion, which defends counterattack from this expansion, but we also suddenly get this. So I think most players would expand here, add on more barracks, and then do whatever, but Light knows that, hey, I can expand here and here. Two bases for the price of one. So that was, I think, the entire thought process with that one. The obvious thing is that just having even slightly more land to defend can be a giant pain in the ass and can end up resulting in a bunch more losses, which is exactly what I think we saw here. If we just do a little 2D mix on this map, we see that right there, just having a little bit too skimpy defense here right along this wall opened up this expansion all the way, and there wasn't really much that he could do about that from now. I lost a whole bunch of words. There wasn't a lot that Light could do about that once that happened now. Great. Got all of them. Done. Victory. So, and, a general question that Fantasy with a C asks is, what do you think the most common mistake Terrans make in Terran vs. Zerg? That is a great question. And I think the best summary of what actually players in all matchups make the biggest mistakes in is weaker decisions after the mid game, because almost every race and every matchup has some mid game push or some mid game timing attack that everyone's really aware of and sort of goes for, but then no one has a good plan of what to do afterwards. So that's when the mistakes begin to happen. In Terran vs. Zerg in particular, I think the biggest mistakes Terran players make is not getting what being aggressive means. They think it means just running in there and just attacking at every opportunity, but it means freaking Zerg out and keeping Zerg on his feet a lot. So let's actually go back to this map. If we have a Terran player, let's say we have Zerg has these two bases, and we have Zerg here struggling to take this fourth. Like maybe it's building and we have some swarms and lurkers going down here, and you're Terran. The way you want to be aggressive is by moving troops really far up here, pushing Zerg even beyond this rubble right here, all the way back here, and maybe trying to take advantage of some drops here. Or dropping right here while you're pushing up there. And then while Terran moves all the way back down here, we have mines being laid here, and some units rallied here, and as we're pushing all the way up here, maybe we have another dropship going around here. It's linking up these attacks as we move across the map, where Zerg is like, God, I need units here to defend, and I need units here to defend, so I cannot move out. But a lot of Terran players try to... it's almost like they try to take advantage of something that's not there. You'll see a Terran player, for instance, move up here and lose a whole bunch of Medic Marine trying to run past swarms and lurkers into the Zerg's main, because Terran's thinking, oh, I'm so aggressive, I know what I'm doing. But of course that's just tossing free units away. That's part of the reason why I loved Flash versus Hogel on Eye of the Storm so much, is that Flash just jammed himself into Hogel's face all the time, and there was nothing Hogel could really do about it. He created the opportunities that he took advantage of. He wasn't just hoping that there was an opportunity there. Continuing on that point a little bit, we saw Light moving dropships up here, but there was no clear attack path that he was going to be taking advantage of, so they ended up dying almost immediately. Sometimes it does work and it might feel nice, but we can't assume that free area is going to be there every time. We need to create that opportunity. And that is the biggest, most important thing, is creating opportunities for yourself and then just punishing them. And also, especially in Terran vs. Zerg in particular, if you're pounding the Zerg opponent apart, he needs defilers in order to get anywhere, because his army is so small, so you can be a little more comfortable spreading your army out. In this game, clearly Effort's army got really big really fast, but again, in Flash vs. Hogel, Hogel was being pounded apart so much that the only way he could even hope to move towards the middle of the map was to throw some swarms down with lurkers and zerglings, and then hope to get a good position from there. But of course, If the Terran player knows that this push is going to consist of a Defiler and then like 12 Zerglings and 3 Lurkers, you don't need your whole Medic Marine army there. You can maybe keep a control group and a half there and have the remainder of your army moving somewhere else. So splitting up a lot of units and being very, very defensive is going to be totally a really good benefit. So yeah, we have time for just a few more questions. Nightcat, ooh, I like this a lot. Nightcat asks, being aggressive as Terran, you said is a good counter for Lurkers to take advantage of the mid-game. But Nightcat asks, can being aggressive as Terran be a good counter to Mutalisk harass, i.e. trying to move towards Zerg's third while Mutalisks are harassing? That is hard to do, and we've seen Flash do that a lot, and it's really awesome to see. I think that the key, if you're doing that, is to make sure that when you move out in the first place, that you're moving out a little bit before the Mutalisks get there. Like, if Mutalisks are at your main already, it's not really going to do anything. And also, if you are moving to a place that's easily defendable by Mutalisks, it's not really a good idea. So let's actually go back to this map, for instance. Here's a great example. Let's say Zerg is here, has expanded here, and then takes this as his third gas, and the Terran player is up here at this north position. If Terran starts to move out, Zerg can just harass here, just do unbelievable amounts of damage as the Medic Marine are slowly wandering over here, and then the instant they get here, the Mutalisks take 2 steps, kill this off. Or even if the Medic Marine get here and Zerg sees this, Zerg can just wander right back here, and Zerg feels fine. On a map like Heartbreak Ridge, now we're talking about a situation where Terran can really put a lot of pressure on Zerg by moving towards the expansion, because Zerg has to pull all the way back and really does have to deal with the push effectively. So in a lot of cross-map situations where Zerg normally feels comfortable because of the huge distances, now all of a sudden Mutalisk harass feels a lot weaker, because this distance implies that you need to pull the Mutalisk back if you want to defend. So those are situations where I think it's a little bit weaker. If you're closer together, if you're farther, it's a little bit stronger. And maps aside, you just need to have very, very good timing with your first little group of Medic Marines coming out. That's why we see players who do this get a second barracks so quickly, so they can get a decent Medic Marine size out and a good composition, because you really do need fire bats when you're moving out that early. So we shall just take one more question. Let me see. What is a great, wonderful, incredible way to end this? I like this question by MR Apex asks, in this game, it seems like we only saw 2 Sunkens. Excuse me, that's Mr. Apex. Reading is essential. There we go. In this game, it seems like we only saw 2 Sunkens. Why was effort so secure with so little base defense? Now I'm getting made fun of for saying MR Apex. Well, I didn't want to say M Rapex. That's the first thing I said. So I was like, man, I better make sure I word this one properly. And then it turned out that all I have to do is read, and that sort of fixes everything. The reason we only saw 2 sunken colonies is because so many Zerglings were being made. And that's actually an important thing to think about. And actually to note, you might even want to try this if you're not familiar with this, is that 2 sunken colonies and maybe 12 to 16 Zerglings can hold off a lot of Medic Marine, especially an early expanding Terran's first push. And especially considering the fact that we saw effort getting like 36 Zerglings over time, there was almost no risk of dying if Terran did end up getting to his base. Moreover, there's always the fear Terran has of, okay, now I'm also against burrowed Zerglings, so I'm now even less inclined to attack, but let's ignore that psychological component and just straight up, if Terran attacks, we're not feeling too scared as Zerg. And right about the time we do start to feel scared, that's when the Lurkers pop out. And we saw that lack of defense ended up okay throughout the entire game. Because effort was so good at pressuring Light early on that Light didn't really have the opportunity to push forward. So when the Lurkers did come out, they didn't even have to be defensive, they got to be aggressive. And of course, we've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And that wraps up the Day 9 Daily number 12 on November 8th. Thanks everyone. Hope you tune in again. Cheers.